You are listening to HOA Outplayed. The paper trail was messy and still undeniable. You are on camera now. Joan slammed a vendor contract on the counter and screamed that I was not allowed to see bids. Her phone was on speaker, held high like it settled everything, screen turned away so I could not see who she was supposedly calling. I kept my phone in my hand, recording, and I did not move. The maintenance worker in the reflective vest stood near the door, watching silently, and I could see him glance at Joan, then at me, then back at Joan. She was shaking, her face red, and the intermittent drizzle outside made the whole scene feel like we were trapped under an eave with nowhere to go. I work as a rideshare fleet coordinator. I schedule drivers and vehicles, I track maintenance windows, and I know how vendor contracts work. I know what a bid packet looks like. I know what a legitimate RFP process looks like, and I know when someone is hiding something. Joan is the rules interpretation chair at the Landing at Harborview Association here in Denver, Colorado. She claims she wrote the covenants herself, which is not true, but she says it enough that some residents believe her. Right now, she is standing between me and a stack of printed photos clipped together, and she is telling me I have no right to see the towing contract that cost me $600 2 months ago. 2 months ago, my car was towed from my assigned spot at 2 in the morning. The notice said unauthorized vehicle, which made no sense because I have lived here for 3 years and my parking pass has never expired. I filed an appeal, I submitted photos, I submitted my lease addendum, and the appeal was denied in writing with no explanation. I paid the tow fee and the fine to avoid a lien, and I let it go because I was paying off debt and I could not afford a fight. One bogus collection notice could ruin months of progress. I thought it was over. Then, last week, a rumor started spreading in the neighborhood group chat. A special assessment was coming, something about emergency repairs, but nobody could get a line item breakdown. I asked the management company for the proposed budget. They said it was confidential until the vote. I asked Joan directly at the mailbox cluster, and she said the same thing, word for word, like she had rehearsed it. That is when I started asking questions about the old case. My tow, 2 months ago, never made sense. The timing was wrong, the paperwork was sloppy, and the appeal process felt like a joke. I went back through my email, I pulled my timeline, and I realized something. The tow happened 3 days after I questioned a different vendor bid at a meeting. I had asked why we were switching landscaping companies mid-contract, and Joan told me to sit down because I was out of order. 3 days later, my car was gone. So I filed a records request. I asked for all towing invoices from the past year, all vendor contracts, and all meeting minutes related to enforcement policy. The response came back in a certified envelope, and it was garbage. Half the pages were missing, the towing contract was redacted in weird places, and the meeting minutes from 2 months ago were a single paragraph that did not match what I remembered. I know what I heard at that meeting. I know what Joan said, I know what the treasurer said, and I know that the vote was supposed to happen the following month. But the minutes said the vote happened that night, unanimously with no discussion. That is impossible because I was there and I saw people argue. I filed a second request. I asked for the original draft minutes, the proxy forms, and the vendor bid comparison spreadsheet. The records custodian called me and said the file is confidential and I am not allowed to photograph anything. I said that is not how public records work in an HOA, and she hung up on me. So I called my attorney. He is a local guy I know through family, and he gave me a realistic plan. File a formal complaint with the state, keep a clean timeline, and do not let them bait me into anything that looks like harassment. He said if the HOA is altering records, they are opening themselves up to serious liability, and I just need to stay calm and let them keep digging. That brings me to today. I am standing in the management office lobby, and Joan is screaming at me because I asked to see the vendor contract bids in person. I did not demand, I did not threaten, I just asked. The office manager said she would check with the board, and Joan appeared out of nowhere, slammed the contract pages on the counter, and told me I was not allowed. The maintenance worker is still standing by the door, and I can see him shift his weight like he is deciding whether to intervene. Joan is holding her phone on speaker, but nobody is talking on the other end. I do not think she actually called anyone. I think she is bluffing, and I am going to let her keep going, because every second of this is on my phone. Joan is saying something about privacy and proprietary vendor relationships, which is nonsense because HOA vendor contracts are not proprietary. She is making it up as she goes, and I can see the office manager behind her looking uncomfortable. I stay quiet, I let Joan talk, and I watch her phone. The screen is dark, nobody is on the line. She is pretending to have backup, and it is not working. The maintenance worker finally speaks up. He says, "Ma'am, I think you need to let him see the bids if he filed a records request." Joan snaps at him and tells him to stay out of it, and he steps back, but he does not leave. That is 2 witnesses now. The office manager and the maintenance worker. Both of them just saw Joan refuse a legal records request and try to intimidate me with a fake phone call. I ask Joan a simple question. I say, "Is the towing contract part of the vendor bids I requested?" She does not answer. She just says, "I do not care what you think. I care what the rule says." I ask again. I say, "If the towing contract is part of the bids, then I am allowed to see it under Colorado HOA law." She slams her hand on the counter and says, "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." That line lands wrong, and I see the office manager wince. Joan just admitted that she has a committee specifically to handle residents who push back. That is not normal. That is not how HOA boards work. That is a retaliation machine, and she just said it out loud, on camera. I thank the office manager. I tell her I will follow up in writing, and I leave. Joan does not follow me outside, but I hear her yelling at the office manager as the door closes. I walk back to my unit. I sit down at my desk, and I start building my timeline. I have 3 years of emails. I have every notice the HOA ever sent me, and I have my records request responses. I pull out a clipboard with color-coded sticky notes labeled by dates. Yellow for enforcement actions, blue for vendor changes, red for meeting minutes discrepancies, green for financial questions. I start matching dates, and a pattern emerges. 2 years ago, another resident was towed under similar circumstances. His name is Marcus, and he posted about it in the neighborhood group chat at the time. He said his car was towed from his assigned spot. He filed an appeal, and the appeal was denied with no explanation. He paid the fee and moved out 3 months later. I remember thinking it was weird, but I did not connect it to anything bigger. Now I am looking at the dates, and I see that Marcus was towed 1 week after he questioned the landscaping contract at a meeting. The same landscaping contract I questioned 2 months ago. The same meeting where Joan told me to sit down. I pull up the meeting minutes from 2 years ago, and they are just as sloppy as the recent ones. The vote on the landscaping contract is listed as unanimous, but I remember Marcus saying he voted no. I check the proxy forms and I see something strange. 3 of the proxy votes are signed with the same pen, same handwriting, same pressure. They are not from different residents, they are from the same person, and I am pretty sure it is Joan. I do not have proof yet, but I have a hypothesis. Joan is using proxy votes and procedural tricks to block residents from speaking, and she is punishing anyone who pushes back by staging enforcement actions. I call my attorney and walk him through what I found. He tells me to keep building the timeline and to request the portal audit log. He says if Joan or the management company deleted my appeal or altered the minutes, there will be a digital trail. I file a 3rd records request, this time asking for the portal audit log from the past year. I submit it in writing, I email a copy to the board president, and I CC the management company. I know this is going to make Joan furious, but I do not care. I walked away on purpose, because I wanted her to follow and say more. The response comes back 3 days later. The records custodian sends me a 1-line email saying the portal log is not available due to technical issues. I forward it to my attorney, and he says that is not a valid reason. He drafts a formal complaint to the State Consumer Protection Office and tells me to wait for Joan to make the next move. He says she will escalate because she feels cornered, and I need to be ready. He is right. The next move comes in the form of a certified letter. It arrives on a Saturday, which is strange because the post office does not usually deliver certified mail on weekends, but here it is. I sign for it, I open it, and I see a notice of violation. The HOA is claiming I failed to maintain my exterior paint, which is absurd because my unit was painted last year and I have the invoice. The notice says I have 14 days to repaint or I will be fined $200 per day. The letter is dated 5 days ago, which means I only have 9 days left. The notice also says the violation was reported by a neighbor, but it does not say which neighbor. I take photos of my exterior. I pull the paint invoice, and I email the HOA office asking for clarification. No response. I walk the perimeter of my unit and check every inch of the exterior. The paint is fine. There are no chips, no fading, no peeling. I take close-up photos, I take wide shots, and I document the date and time on my phone. I also notice something. Joan lives 3 units down, and her exterior has visible fading on the trim. I take photos of her unit too, just in case. I am not trying to report her, but I want to see if the HOA applies the same standards to board members. Spoiler, they do not. I email the HOA office again and attach my photos. I ask for the name of the neighbor who reported the violation, and I ask for the inspection report that led to the notice. I also ask if the board has inspected Joan's unit, because her trim is visibly faded and I want to make sure the rules are applied evenly. I send the email, I CC my attorney, and I wait. The response comes back in less than an hour. The office manager says the neighbor complaint is confidential, the inspection report is not available, and my request about Joan's unit is inappropriate and harassing. I forward it to my attorney, and he says we are getting close. He says the HOA is panicking, and they are going to make a mistake. The mistake comes 2 days later. I get a call from a tow company dispatcher. She says my car is scheduled for tow tonight at midnight because it is blocking a fire lane. I tell her my car is in my assigned spot, not in a fire lane, and I ask who requested the tow. She says the Landing at Harborview Association, and she gives me a reference number. I ask her to hold the tow until I can confirm with the HOA, and she says she will make a note but she cannot guarantee anything. I call the HOA office, and the voicemail says they are closed for the day. I call Joan directly, and she does not answer. I leave a voicemail asking her to call me back immediately because there is a mistake with the tow order. She does not call back. At 11:30 that night, I go outside and sit in my car. I have my phone, I have my parking pass on the dashboard, and I have my attorney on speed dial. At midnight, a tow truck pulls into the lot. The driver gets out, walks over to my car, and checks the license plate. I roll down my window and ask him what is going on. He says he has an order to tow my car for blocking a fire lane. I tell him I am not blocking a fire lane, I am in my assigned spot, and I show him my parking pass. He looks at the pass, he looks at the spot number, and he says he is going to call dispatch. He steps away, he makes the call, and I hear him say, "Yeah, I am on site, and the vehicle is in an assigned spot, not a fire lane." There is a pause, and then he says, "Are you sure? Because the resident is here, and he is showing me his pass." The driver hangs up and walks back over. He says dispatch is telling him to proceed with the tow, but he does not feel right about it because I am clearly in an assigned spot. He says he is going to call his supervisor. I thank him, and I pull out my phone and start recording. He makes another call, and this time I can hear the conversation because he is standing close. He says, "I have a resident here with a valid parking pass in an assigned spot, and the HOA is saying it is a fire lane violation." The supervisor says, "If the resident has a pass and the spot is marked, do not tow." The driver hangs up, he tells me he is not going to tow my car, and he gives me his business card. He says if the HOA calls again, they need to provide proof that I am violating something, because he is not going to tow someone who is clearly in the right. I thank him, I shake his hand, and he leaves. I go back inside and email my attorney with a full summary. I attach the tow company business card photo, I attach my parking pass photo, and I attach the video of the driver on the phone with dispatch. My attorney responds within 10 minutes. He says this is gold, and he wants me to file a police report for attempted vehicle theft. I am not sure that is the right move, but he insists. He says if the HOA is ordering tows on vehicles that are legally parked, that is theft, and I need a paper trail. I call the non-emergency line, and a deputy comes out an hour later. I explain the situation. I show him my parking pass, I show him the video, and I give him the tow company business card. He takes notes. He gives me an incident report number, and he says he is going to follow up with the tow company and the HOA. He also says this is not the first time he has heard about the Landing at Harborview Association pulling stunts like this, and I should consider filing a formal complaint with the city. The next morning, I get a call from the tow company supervisor. He says his driver told him what happened, and he wants to let me know that his company is cutting ties with the Landing at Harborview Association. He says they have had multiple incidents where the HOA ordered tows on legally parked vehicles, and his company is not going to be part of it anymore. He says if I need a witness statement for any legal proceedings, he is happy to provide one. I thank him, I get his contact information, and I forward it to my attorney. My attorney says this is even better than he thought, because now we have a vendor willing to go on record about the HOA's abuse. I also get an email from the office manager. She says the board has decided to rescind the paint violation notice, and she apologizes for the confusion. She does not explain what the confusion was, and she does not acknowledge the tow attempt. I respond and ask for a written explanation of why the notice was issued in the first place, and I ask for confirmation that the tow order has been canceled. No response. I forward the email chain to my attorney, and he says we are ready to file the formal complaint. He drafts a complaint to the State Consumer Protection Office alleging harassment, retaliation, selective enforcement, and fraudulent record-keeping. He attaches my timeline, my photos, my records request responses, my incident report number, and the tow company supervisor's contact information. He files it electronically, and he sends me a copy. He says the state will open a case file, and the HOA will be notified within 2 weeks. I keep building my timeline. I go back through the neighborhood group chat and find 3 more residents who were towed under suspicious circumstances in the past 2 years. One of them is still in the neighborhood, and I reach out to him. His name is Kevin, and he says his tow happened 1 week after he questioned the HOA's reserve fund balance at a meeting. He says he filed an appeal, it was denied, and he paid the fee because he did not want to fight. I ask him if he kept any of the paperwork, and he says he has the tow receipt and the appeal denial letter. He emails them to me, and I add them to my timeline. The pattern is clear. Every resident who questioned a financial or vendor decision was targeted with a bogus enforcement action within 2 weeks. I also pull the HOA's tax filings from the state website. They are public record, and I want to see if there are any discrepancies between the filed amounts and the amounts listed in the meeting minutes. I find something interesting. The tax filing from 2 years ago lists a payment to the tow company that is 20% higher than the amount listed in the meeting minutes. The difference is about $4,000. I do not know where that money went, but it did not go to the reserve fund, and it did not go to any line item I can find in the budget. I add it to my timeline, and I send it to my attorney. He says this is the smoking gun. He says if Joan or the board president is skimming vendor payments, that is fraud, and the state is going to take it seriously. I am about to email the board president directly when I get another certified letter. This one is from a law firm. The letter says, the Landing at Harborview Association is prepared to take legal action against me for harassment and defamation unless I cease all communication with the board and withdraw my records requests. The letter lists specific emails I sent, including the one where I asked if Joan's unit had been inspected. It says my comments about Joan are defamatory and harmful to her reputation. It also says that if I do not comply within 5 days, the HOA will file a lawsuit seeking damages and attorney fees. I read the letter twice, and I start laughing. My attorney warned me this was coming. He said the HOA would try to intimidate me with a lawyer letter, and I should not respond directly. He said to forward it to him and let him handle it. I forward the letter, and my attorney calls me back within an hour. He says the letter is garbage and the law firm is doing the HOA a disservice by putting this in writing. He says my emails are protected communication, I have a right to request records, and asking about uneven enforcement is not defamation. He also says the 5-day deadline is a bluff, and if the HOA actually files a lawsuit, they are going to lose and pay my attorney fees. He drafts a response on my behalf. The response says I am exercising my legal rights as an HOA member. My records requests are valid under Colorado law, and any attempt to silence me will be countered with a motion for sanctions. He sends the response to the law firm, he CCs the board president, and he sends me a copy. He says this is going to make Joan very angry, and I should expect another escalation. The escalation comes the next day. I get a call from the management company. The woman on the phone says the board has scheduled a special hearing to discuss my conduct, and I am required to attend. The hearing is in 3 days, and if I do not attend, the board will proceed without me and impose sanctions. I ask what sanctions, and she says it depends on the board's findings. I ask what conduct they are investigating, and she says it is all in the notice that was mailed to me. I tell her I have not received any notice, and she says it was mailed yesterday. I ask her to email me a copy, and she says she will check with the board. She never sends it. I call my attorney, and he says the hearing is a setup. He says the board is trying to create a record that I am uncooperative, and they are going to use it to justify more fines or restrictions. He says I should attend, I should bring my timeline, and I should record everything. He also says he is going to attend with me, because this is going to be the moment where Joan makes a big mistake. He says if she is willing to hold a special hearing just to punish me, she is going to say something incriminating, and I need to be ready to capture it. The hearing is held in the clubhouse meeting room. I arrive early with my attorney, and we set up at one end of the table. I have my clipboard with color-coded sticky notes labeled by dates. I have my clean timeline packet with dates, receipts, and photos, and I have my phone set to record. Joan arrives a few minutes later with the board president and the treasurer. The board president is a man named Richard, and he looks uncomfortable. The treasurer is a woman named Diane, and she avoids eye contact. Joan is holding a stack of printed papers, and she is smiling. That smile tells me everything I need to know. She thinks she has already won. Richard calls the meeting to order, and he reads a prepared statement. He says the board has received multiple complaints about my behavior, including harassment of board members, inappropriate records requests, and defamatory statements. He says the board takes these complaints seriously, and they are considering sanctions ranging from fines to suspension of my HOA voting rights. He asks if I have anything to say before they deliberate. My attorney stands up and introduces himself. He says I am here to respond to the allegations, but first, he wants to clarify what specific conduct the board is alleging. Richard looks at Joan, and Joan takes over. Joan says I have been harassing her by questioning her authority, by filing frivolous records requests, and by making false statements about her unit's exterior condition. She says I have also been contacting other residents and spreading rumors about the HOA's finances. She says this behavior is unacceptable, and the board has a duty to protect the community from disruptive residents. My attorney asks Joan to provide documentation of the harassment. Joan pulls out a stack of printed emails, and she starts reading them out loud. The first email is the one where I asked to see the vendor bids. The second email is the one where I asked if Joan's unit had been inspected. The third email is the one where I asked for the portal audit log. My attorney lets her finish, and then he asks her a simple question. He says, which of these emails violates any HOA rule or Colorado law? Joan does not answer. She just says, I do not care what you think, I care what the rule says. My attorney smiles. He says, I am going to ask you again. Which email violates any rule or law? Joan says the emails are harassing because they question the board's authority. My attorney says, questioning the board is not harassment, it is a member's right. He says, do you have any evidence that my client violated a specific rule? Joan does not answer. She looks at Richard, and Richard says the board believes my conduct is disruptive. My attorney says, disruptive is not a rule violation. He says, if you are going to impose sanctions, you need to cite a specific rule. Richard looks at Diane, and Diane says nothing. The room is silent for a long moment, and I can see Joan's face turning red. If you want to see how this hearing ends, hit that subscribe button, because it is about to get wild. My attorney pulls out his own packet. He says, since we are discussing conduct, I would like the board to explain why my client's car was ordered towed from his assigned spot at midnight last week. Joan says that was a mistake by the tow company. My attorney says the tow company has a different story. He says the tow company supervisor is willing to testify that the HOA ordered the tow, and when the driver questioned it, the HOA dispatcher insisted he proceed. He says the tow company has since cut ties with the HOA because of repeated incidents like this. Joan says that is not true. My attorney asks her to provide the tow order documentation. Joan says it is not available. My attorney says, convenient. He keeps going. He says, I also want the board to explain why the portal audit log is suddenly unavailable due to technical issues. He says, my client filed a records request, and the response was a one-line email with no explanation. He asks Richard if he is aware that Colorado law requires HOAs to maintain records and provide them to members upon request. Richard says the board is working on resolving the technical issues. My attorney says, how long do technical issues usually last? Richard does not answer. My attorney says, my client filed the request 10 days ago. He says if the portal is down, the board should be able to provide a backup copy or a manual export. He asks if the board has attempted to do that. Richard looks at Joan, and Joan says the records custodian is handling it. My attorney says, the records custodian told my client the file is confidential. He says that is not a valid reason to deny a records request. He asks Joan if she instructed the records custodian to deny the request. Joan says she did not. My attorney says, so the records custodian acted alone? Joan says she does not know what the records custodian did. My attorney pulls out another document. He says, I have one more question for the board. He says, can you explain why the tax filing from 2 years ago lists a payment to the tow company that is 20% higher than the amount listed in the meeting minutes? He slides a copy of the tax filing across the table to Richard. Richard picks it up, he reads it, and his face goes pale. He looks at Joan, and Joan says she does not have access to the tax filings. My attorney says the filings are public record and anyone can request them from the state. He says the discrepancy is about $4,000, and my client would like to know where that money went. Richard says he will need to review the records. My attorney says that is fine, but in the meantime, my client is not going to be sanctioned for asking legitimate questions about HOA finances. He says, if the board proceeds with sanctions, my client will file a motion in court, and the board will have to explain these discrepancies under oath. The room goes silent. Diane is staring at the table. Richard is flipping through the tax filing pages. Joan is gripping the edge of the table, and I can see her knuckles turning white. My attorney says, I think we are done here. He says, my client has not violated any rule, and the board has no basis to impose sanctions. He says if the board has concerns about HOA finances or vendor contracts, they should address those concerns internally, but they should not retaliate against a member for asking questions. He stands up, I stand up, and we leave. As we walk out, I hear Joan start yelling at Richard, and I hear Richard tell her to stop. My attorney grins and says, that went better than I expected. The next day, I get an email from Richard. He says the board has decided not to pursue sanctions, and he apologizes for any confusion. He says the board is committed to transparency, and they are working on resolving the records access issues. He does not mention the tow, he does not mention the tax filing, and he does not mention Joan. I forward the email to my attorney, and he says this is the beginning of the end. He says the board is backing down because they know they are exposed, and Joan is going to be isolated. He says, keep building your timeline and wait for the state to respond to the complaint. The state response comes 2 weeks later. I get a letter from the Colorado Consumer Protection Office saying they have opened a case file, and they are requesting documentation from the Landing at Harborview Association. The letter lists specific items they want to see, including all vendor contracts from the past 3 years, all meeting minutes, all proxy forms, all tow orders, and the portal audit log. The letter gives the HOA 30 days to comply. I forward the letter to my attorney, and he says this is the best possible outcome. He says the state is taking it seriously, and the HOA is going to have to produce everything. He says if there are discrepancies, the state will find them, and Joan is not going to be able to hide anymore. I also get a message from Kevin, the resident who was towed 2 years ago. He says he heard about the state investigation, and he wants to submit his own complaint. He says he kept all his paperwork, and he is willing to testify if needed. I put him in touch with my attorney, and my attorney says he is going to include Kevin's case in the state complaint as additional evidence of a pattern. He says the more residents who come forward, the stronger the case becomes. I reach out to Marcus, the resident who moved out 2 years ago, and I ask if he is willing to provide a statement. He says he is, and he sends me a detailed account of what happened to him. He says his tow was clearly retaliation for questioning the landscaping contract, and he regrets not fighting it at the time. I send his statement to my attorney, and my attorney says this is perfect. He says we now have 3 residents with nearly identical stories, and the pattern is undeniable. A week later, I get a call from a woman who says she is a forensic accountant hired by the state to review the Landing at Harborview Association's financial records. She says she needs to schedule a time to come to the property and review the physical files, and she wants to know if I am available to walk her through my timeline. I tell her I am, and we schedule a meeting for the following week. She shows up with a briefcase and a laptop, and I spend 2 hours walking her through every detail. I show her my color-coded sticky notes, I show her my timeline packet, I show her the tax filing discrepancies, and I show her the vendor payment records I was able to piece together from the incomplete records requests. She takes notes, she takes photos of my documents, and she says this is very helpful. She says she is going to request additional records from the management company and the tow company, and she will be in touch. 2 weeks later, the forensic accountant sends me an email. She says she has completed her review, and she has identified multiple irregularities. She says the tow company payments do not match the invoices. The proxy forms appear to have been forged, and the meeting minutes have been altered after the fact. She says she is recommending that the state pursue a formal investigation, and she is requesting that the HOA board be placed under temporary oversight. She says I will be notified when the state makes a decision. I forward the email to my attorney, and he says this is exactly what we wanted. He says the state is not going to let this slide, and Joan is going to face serious consequences. The consequences start coming fast. The HOA receives a letter from the state ordering them to freeze all vendor payments and to place all financial decisions under temporary oversight by a court-appointed administrator. The letter also orders the board to hold a special election within 60 days to fill all board positions. The letter is posted on the HOA website, and within hours the neighborhood group chat explodes. Residents are asking what happened, they are asking if they need to do anything, and they are asking if Joan is still on the board. Joan posts a message saying the state is overreaching, and the board is going to fight it. Richard posts a message saying the board is complying with the state's order, and Joan's message does not represent the board's position. That tells me everything I need to know. Richard is cutting ties with Joan, and she is on her own. I also get a message from the tow company supervisor. He says the state contacted him for a statement, and he provided a full account of every tow order the HOA placed over the past 3 years. He says he also provided copies of the dispatch logs, which show that Joan personally called in several of the tows, including mine. He says the logs include recorded phone calls, and Joan can be heard on tape ordering tows on vehicles that were legally parked. He says the state now has the recordings, and Joan is not going to be able to deny it. I thank him, and I forward the message to my attorney. My attorney says this is the final piece. He says Joan is done. The special election is scheduled for 6 weeks out, and multiple residents announce they are running for board positions. I do not run because I do not want the job, but I help organize a candidate forum so residents can ask questions. The forum is packed, and the candidates are asked about financial oversight, vendor transparency, and enforcement policy. Every candidate says they support stronger oversight and more transparency. Joan shows up at the forum, and she tries to defend her record. She says she has been serving the community for years, and she is being unfairly targeted by a small group of disruptive residents. Someone in the audience asks her about the tow recordings, and she says they are being taken out of context. Someone else asks her about the tax filing discrepancies, and she says she does not have access to the financial records. The room goes silent, and I can see people looking at each other. Joan realizes she has lost, and she leaves the forum early. A week before the election, I get an email from Richard. He says Joan has resigned from the board, effective immediately. He says the board accepts her resignation, and they are moving forward with the election as planned. He also says the board has reviewed the vendor contracts, and they have identified multiple issues that are being addressed with the state's oversight. He says the board is committed to transparency and accountability going forward. I forward the email to my attorney, and he says this is the best possible outcome. He says Joan is out, the HOA is under oversight, and I have a clear path to hold them accountable for the past abuses. But I am not done yet. I still have one more move to make. I still have my trump card, and I have been holding it for the right moment. I have the records request response that shows the HOA altered the minutes after the meeting. The response came back with a PDF file that has embedded metadata, and when I checked the creation date, I saw that the minutes were created 2 days after the meeting, not on the night of the meeting. I also saw that the file was edited 3 times over the next week, and each edit happened after a resident submitted a records request. I did not mention this to Joan during the hearing because I wanted her to repeat her claim that the minutes are accurate. She did, multiple times, and I have it on video. Now I am going to show the metadata to the state, and I am going to ask them to investigate whether Joan personally altered the minutes to hide the vendor contract vote. I send the metadata report to the forensic accountant, along with my video from the hearing where Joan insists the minutes are accurate. The forensic accountant responds within a day. She says this is exactly the kind of evidence they need, and she is going to include it in the final report to the state. She says if the metadata shows the minutes were altered after residents questioned them, that is fraud, and Joan could face criminal charges. She says the state will make a decision within 30 days. I thank her, and I wait. The 30 days feel like forever, but the decision finally comes. The state sends a letter to the HOA, to me, and to every resident who filed a complaint. The letter says the state has completed its investigation, and they have determined that the Landing at Harborview Association violated multiple provisions of Colorado HOA law, including record-keeping requirements, enforcement transparency, and member rights. The letter says the HOA is required to refund all fines and fees tied to the enforcement actions that were found to be retaliatory or improperly documented. The letter also says Joan Davis is being referred to the district attorney for possible criminal charges related to fraudulent record-keeping and abuse of fiduciary duty. The letter says the HOA is required to implement an updated enforcement policy that bans surprise inspections without written notice, and the policy must be approved by the state before it takes effect. I read the letter 3 times, and then I call my attorney. He is laughing on the phone. He says, "You did it." He says, "You took down a corrupt board member. You got the HOA under oversight, and you are getting your money back." He says, "This is one of the cleanest wins I have seen in an HOA case." I thank him, and I hang up. I sit down at my desk, I look at my clipboard with color-coded sticky notes labeled by dates, and I let out a long breath. It is over. The refunds start arriving 2 weeks later. I get a check for the tow fee, the fine, and the appeal processing fee. Kevin gets his refund. Marcus gets his refund even though he moved out 2 years ago. The HOA also issues a formal apology to all 3 of us, signed by Richard and the new board members. The apology says the board recognizes that the previous enforcement actions were improper, and they are committed to ensuring it does not happen again. The apology is posted on the HOA website, and it stays up for 60 days. Joan does not respond to the apology, and she does not attend any HOA meetings. I hear through the neighborhood group chat that she moved out a month later. The election results come in, and all the new candidates win. The new board holds its first meeting, and they announce that they are implementing the updated enforcement policy required by the state. The policy includes a provision that all enforcement actions must be documented with photos, all notices must include a clear explanation of the violation, and all appeals must be reviewed by an independent third party. The policy also bans surprise inspections without written notice, and it requires the board to publish a quarterly enforcement report showing how many violations were issued and how many were upheld. The new board president says the policy is designed to prevent future abuses, and he thanks the residents who pushed for accountability. He does not mention me by name, but everyone in the room knows who he is talking about. I also get a call from the district attorney's office. The prosecutor assigned to Joan's case says they have reviewed the evidence, and they are moving forward with charges. She says Joan is being charged with 1 count of fraudulent record-keeping and 1 count of abuse of fiduciary duty. She says the charges are misdemeanors, but if convicted, Joan could face fines, probation, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. She says the case is scheduled for a preliminary hearing in 3 months, and I may be called as a witness. I tell her I am available, and she thanks me for my cooperation. She also says the state is considering additional civil penalties against the HOA for the systemic violations, but that process will take longer. I thank her, and I hang up. 3 months later, I get a call from the prosecutor. She says Joan has accepted a plea deal. Joan pled guilty to 1 count of fraudulent record-keeping in exchange for the abuse of fiduciary duty charge being dropped. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, a $5,000 fine, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. She was also ordered to attend a mandatory ethics course. The prosecutor says the deal was offered because the state wanted to avoid a lengthy trial, and Joan's attorney convinced her that fighting it would only make things worse. The prosecutor says Joan also agreed to cooperate with the civil investigation, which means she is providing documentation of how the vendor payment scheme worked. The prosecutor says this cooperation will help the state recover additional funds for the HOA, and it will strengthen the case for systemic reform. I thank her, and I hang up. The civil investigation wraps up a few months later, and the state issues a final report. The report says the Landing at Harborview Association failed to maintain proper financial controls, failed to document enforcement actions, and failed to provide timely records access to members. The report recommends that the HOA remain under temporary oversight for 1 additional year, and it recommends that the management company be replaced due to its role in enabling the violations. The report also recommends that the state legislature consider stronger penalties for HOA board members who engage in retaliatory enforcement. The report is published on the State Consumer Protection website, and it becomes a reference case for other HOA disputes in Colorado. My attorney sends me a copy, and he says this is the best possible outcome. He says I not only won my case, but I also helped create a precedent that will protect other residents in the future. I still live at the Landing at Harborview Association. The new board is doing a good job. They hold regular meetings, they publish financial reports, and they respond to records requests within the legal time frame. The updated enforcement policy is working, and I have not seen any bogus violation notices since it was implemented. The neighborhood group chat is calmer, and residents are more engaged. People show up to meetings, they ask questions, and they hold the board accountable. It feels like a real community now, instead of a hostage situation. I still see Richard occasionally at the mailbox cluster. He always nods and says hello, and he never brings up the investigation. I think he is relieved that it is over, and he is trying to move on. Diane resigned from the board after the election, and I do not see her around much anymore. The new treasurer is a retired accountant who takes the job seriously, and she publishes detailed financial reports every quarter. The management company was replaced, and the new company is more responsive and more professional. The tow company never came back, and the new towing contract includes provisions that require the HOA to provide photo evidence before ordering a tow. I also stay in touch with Kevin and Marcus. Kevin is still in the neighborhood, and he is running for the board in the next election. Marcus moved back to Colorado after hearing about the investigation, and he is considering buying a unit in a different neighborhood. He says he is glad he provided a statement, and he is glad the state took it seriously. He also says he learned a valuable lesson about standing up to HOA abuses, and he is not going to let it happen again. I tell him that is the right attitude, and I wish him luck. As for Joan, I heard she moved out of state. Someone in the neighborhood group chat said she relocated to Arizona, but I do not know if that is true. I do not care where she is, as long as she is not harassing residents in Colorado anymore. I do know that her plea deal is public record, and anyone who searches her name will find it. That means she is never going to be able to serve on another HOA board, and she is never going to be able to use her authority to bully people again. That feels like justice to me. The one thing I did not expect is how much this whole experience taught me about HOA law and resident rights. I learned how to file records requests, I learned how to document abuses, and I learned how to navigate the state complaint process. I also learned that standing up to HOA corruption is possible, but it takes time, patience, and a willingness to build a paper trail. I learned that most HOA board members are not bad people, but bad actors like Joan can do a lot of damage if nobody holds them accountable. And I learned that the legal system works, even in HOA disputes, as long as you follow the process and stay calm. I also want to say something to anyone who is dealing with HOA abuse right now. Document everything. Keep a timeline. File records requests. Do not let the board intimidate you with lawyer letters or bogus hearings. Find an attorney who understands HOA law and let them guide you through the process. Reach out to other residents who have been targeted and build a coalition. Report abuses to the State Consumer Protection Office and be patient while they investigate. And most importantly, do not give up. Joan tried to bury me with fines, tow threats, and bogus hearings, but I kept pushing back, and I won. You can too. The funny karma moment came a few weeks after the state report was published. I was at the management office picking up some documents, and I saw a stack of printed packets sitting on the counter. The packets were labeled meeting agendas, and they were ready to be mailed to residents. As I was signing for my documents, a gust of wind from the open door blew the packets off the counter, and they went airborne. Papers scattered everywhere, and the office manager scrambled to pick them up. I helped her, and as I was gathering the pages, I noticed something. One of the packets had Joan's name on it, and it was addressed to her old unit. I handed it to the office manager and she said, "Oh, she does not live here anymore." She tossed the packet in the trash and I could not help but smile. All those printed packets, all those meeting agendas, all that control Joan used to wield, and now her name was literally being thrown away. It felt like the perfect ending. The HOA refunds the fines and fees tied to the scheme. Joan gets a written warning for harassment behavior that turns into a criminal conviction. And the updated enforcement policy that bans surprise inspections without written notice is now the law at the Landing at Harborview Association. I got everything I wanted, and I did it without breaking any rules. I followed the process, I built a paper trail, and I let Joan dig her own grave. She tried to silence me with threats, lawyer letters, and bogus hearings, but I stayed calm, I stayed focused, and I let the evidence speak for itself. And in the end, the evidence was louder than anything Joan could say. I am still paying off debt, and the refund from the HOA helped more than I expected. It covered 2 months of progress that I thought I had lost, and it reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place. One bogus collection notice could have ruined everything, and Joan almost got away with it. But she did not, and now I am back on track. I still coordinate rideshare drivers and vehicles during the day, I still deal with scheduling chaos and maintenance windows, but I do it with a little more confidence now. I know how to stand up for myself. I know how to build a case. And I know that even when someone tries to use their authority to crush you, the law is on your side if you follow the process. Until next time, keep your receipts.